At exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, Maximilian Hartley stood in his penthouse office, staring at a $50 million invoice that would either destroy his reputation or solve the greatest mystery of his life. What he didn't know was that 47 floors below, the woman he'd spent 2 years desperately searching for was emptying his trash can. The invoice trembled slightly in his manicured hands, not from fear, but from exhaustion. 2 years of relentless hunting had carved deep lines around his steel-gray eyes, and his usually perfect posture sagged under the weight of obsession. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath him like a constellation of forgotten dreams, each light representing someone whose story he'd never know. Yet here he was, burning through his fortune to find one face among 8 million souls. Maximilian Hartley hadn't built Soulless Innovations into a $3.2 billion empire by accepting defeat. At 45, he commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, owned properties on 4, and could purchase small countries with his quarterly earnings. But success, he'd discovered, was a hollow crown when worn alone. Every achievement felt borrowed, every triumph incomplete, because deep in his chest lived a debt that no amount of money had been able to repay. 23 years ago, on the coldest night of his life, when his startup dreams lay shattered and his bank account read $12.47, a stranger with kind eyes had saved him from giving up forever. The memory lived in his bones now, more real than any corporate acquisition or stock market victory. He'd been 22 then, fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree that felt worthless against the brutal reality of entrepreneurship. 3 failed investor meetings in one day had left him wandering the frozen streets of Boston, his cheap suit offering no protection against the December wind that cut through fabric and hope alike. He'd collapsed on the steps of an old community center, hypothermia creeping through his veins like liquid despair. That's when she appeared, a woman whose age he couldn't determine, whose name he'd never learned, but whose presence had felt like salvation wrapped in humanity. She'd approached without hesitation, without judgment, carrying a threadbare quilt that smelled of lavender and countless acts of kindness. "You look lost," she'd said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer in the heart of winter. Before he could protest, she'd wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and pressed a steaming cup of tea into his frozen hands. But it was the locket that haunted him most. A delicate silver pendant hanging around her neck, etched with an intricate rose design that caught the streetlight like captured moonbeams. As she'd knelt beside him on those concrete steps, offering comfort to a complete stranger, that locket had swayed gently, becoming a symbol of hope he'd carry for decades. "Whatever you're running from," she'd whispered, "it's not stronger than what you're running toward." She'd stayed with him for exactly 17 minutes. He'd counted every second, until warmth returned to his limbs and clarity to his thoughts. When he'd tried to thank her, to ask her name, she'd simply smiled and disappeared into the night, leaving only the lingering scent of lavender and the unshakable belief that kindness still existed in the world. That belief had sustained him through the dark months that followed. Every time a door slammed in his face, every time his confidence wavered, he'd remember her gentle eyes and steady voice. She'd seen potential in him when he'd seen only failure, offered dignity when the world had offered only rejection. 3 months later, his breakthrough came, the algorithm that would become the foundation of Soulless Innovations. 6 months after that, his first major investor. Within 5 years, he'd revolutionized data security. Within 10, he'd become the youngest CEO to make the Fortune 500. But success had brought an unexpected consequence, the gnawing need to find her, to prove that her faith hadn't been misplaced, to repay a debt that had compounded with interest over 2 decades. He'd hired the best investigators money could buy, deployed AI facial recognition across decades of surveillance footage, even used satellite data to track every shelter and community center within a 200-mile radius. The search had consumed him, becoming more important than profit margins or market share. Private detectives from 3 countries had chased leads across 4 time zones. Forensic artists had aged her face using cutting-edge software. Genealogists had traced pendant designs through estate sales and jewelry archives. $50 million spent, and still she remained a ghost. The investigation room on the 43rd floor had become his shrine to the impossible. Walls covered with photographs, timelines, maps dotted with red pins marking every lead that had crumbled to dust. His board of directors thought he'd lost his mind. His investors questioned his judgment. The business press whispered about his eccentric midlife crisis. They didn't understand that this wasn't about sentiment or nostalgia. This was about completing the circuit of human connection that had been left open for 23 years. This was about proving that gratitude could transcend time and circumstance. This was about finding the person who'd taught him that wealth meant nothing if it couldn't be shared with those who'd made it possible. Maximilian set the invoice down on his mahogany desk and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. Somewhere in the maze of lights below, she existed. Or at least he prayed she did. Every day that passed increased the possibility that death had claimed her, that his search was nothing more than an expensive exercise in futility. But he couldn't stop, not when she'd refused to let him stop on that frozen night all those years ago. 4 floors below Maximilian's obsessive search, Isadora Reeves pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway, humming the same lullaby she'd sung to comfort a shivering young man 2 decades ago. Her soft voice echoed off the polished walls as she worked, the melody floating through empty corridors like a gentle prayer. At 58, Isadora moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate the world without disturbing its surface. Her gray uniform was pressed to perfection, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and around her neck, hidden beneath her collar, hung a silver locket etched with roses. She'd worked the night shift at Faceless Innovations for 18 years, arriving each evening at 6 p.m. and departing at dawn. In all that time, she'd cleaned every office, emptied every wastebasket, polished every surface, yet remained invisible to the people who filled these spaces during daylight hours. She was the keeper of their secrets, the guardian of their messes, the silent witness to their triumphs and failures. Tonight, like every night for the past 2 years, she would clean the penthouse office where a man she'd once comforted spent his evenings staring at photographs and maps, searching for a woman who was closer than he could ever know. If you've ever wondered whether small acts of kindness really matter, whether the people you help remember you, this story will change how you see every interaction. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of hidden connections, because what happens next will prove that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles are hiding in the most ordinary moments. The alarm in Maximilian's penthouse apartment chimed at precisely 5 a.m., the same time it had every morning for the past 15 years. Success demanded discipline, and discipline demanded routine. He rolled from Egyptian cotton sheets worth more than most people's monthly salary, his feet finding heated marble floors that never acknowledged the seasons outside. His morning ritual unfolded with mechanical precision. Shower in his gold-plated bathroom, breakfast prepared by his private chef, steel-cut oats with imported berries, fresh-pressed juice from organic farms he owned in California. The Wall Street Journal waited beside his plate, though he barely scanned the headlines anymore. Financial markets felt trivial compared to his personal quest. By 6:15 a.m., he was stepping into a handmade Italian suit that cost $2,000, more money than Isadora Reeves earned in 3 months. His reflection in the full-length mirror showed a man who looked successful by every conventional measure. But Maximilian saw only incompleteness, a puzzle with its most important piece still missing. The helicopter ride to Faceless Innovations took exactly 12 minutes, lifting him above traffic and ordinary concerns. Through the aircraft's windows, the city revealed itself as a complex grid of possibilities and dead ends. Somewhere in that maze lived the answer he needed, the connection he craved, the closure that had eluded him despite every technological advantage money could provide. His executive floor buzzed with the energy of high-stakes commerce. Assistants scurried past with urgent messages, analysts prepared presentations worth millions, and dealmakers negotiated contracts that would reshape industries. But Maximilian's attention remained fixed on the converted conference room that had become his war room against mystery. The search headquarters occupied prime real estate on the 43rd floor, 2,000 square feet of corporate space transformed into an investigation center that would make federal agencies envious. Digital displays showed facial recognition matches from surveillance cameras across 12 major cities. Physical maps covered one entire wall, marked with colored pins representing every lead, every false hope, every dead end that had consumed another piece of his fortune. The silver locket with the rose design had become his holy grail. 3 investigative teams had scoured estate sales, pawn shops, and genealogy records for any trace of that distinctive piece. They'd tracked similar jewelry through auction houses in London, antique dealers in Paris, and family heirlooms sold during financial hardships across the eastern seaboard. Each lead had promised revelation, but delivered only disappointment. Maximilian spent hours each day in this room, studying photographs enlarged until pixels became visible, reviewing witness statements from people who might have known her, analyzing psychological profiles of women who shared certain characteristics with his memory of that night. The obsession had become a second job, more demanding than running his billion-dollar empire. His morning briefings now included updates from 3 private investigation firms, reports from AI specialists analyzing facial recognition data, and summaries from genealogists tracing family trees backward through generations. The cost exceeded the GDP of small nations, but Maximilian had calculated that his personal net worth could sustain this level of expenditure for another decade. Yet success felt hollow without resolution. Every corporate triumph, every acquisition, every moment of public recognition carried the weight of unfinished business. He built an empire, but couldn't locate the cornerstone that had made it possible. Meanwhile, 37 floors below, Isadora Reeves began her day in darkness. Her alarm sounded at 4 a.m. in a studio apartment that could fit inside Maximilian's walk-in closet. She dressed in the gray uniform that made her invisible to those who mattered in corporate hierarchies, pinned her silver hair into its customary bun, and checked that the locket remained hidden beneath her collar. The same silver pendant that had caught streetlight 23 years ago. Around her neck, hidden beneath her uniform collar, hung the same silver locket she'd worn that night 23 years ago. The only thing left from her grandmother, the only thing that survived when she lost everything. Isadora took the service elevator to avoid the main lobby where security cameras might capture her face for the very database systems hunting her. She moved through corridors that smelled of industrial cleaning products and filtered air, pushing a cart loaded with supplies that kept the corporate world functioning while remaining invisible to those who benefited from her labor. Her story had once been different. 25 years ago, she'd stood before classrooms full of eager children, teaching art and literature, with the passion of someone who believed creativity could change lives. She'd loved watching young minds discover that they could create beauty, that words and colors could express feelings they didn't yet understand. But budget cuts had eliminated her position, along with music and theater programs that administrators deemed non-essential. At 55, with no family and few options, she'd taken the first job available, night custodian at an office building downtown. The work had been steady, invisible, and lonely, but it paid rent and provided health insurance. When Solace Innovations moved into this tower 18 years ago, Isadora had transferred with the cleaning crew. She'd watched the company grow from ambitious startup to global powerhouse, witnessed celebrations and crises from the shadows, learned the rhythms of corporate success while remaining outside its rewards. In her small employee locker, she kept a leather-bound journal where she wrote poems about the people she observed. Pages filled with verses about executives who worked too late, assistants who cried in bathroom stalls, security guards who shared stories during long shifts. Her poetry captured humanity in its unguarded moments, finding beauty in the spaces between official narratives. One recurring theme appeared throughout her writing: reflections on a young man she'd once helped, wondering what had become of the frightened boy who'd sat shivering on community center steps. She'd written dozens of poems about that encounter, each one exploring different aspects of connection, kindness, and the mystery of how small gestures could echo across decades. She had no idea that the answer to her wondering occupied the penthouse above her head. Their paths crossed daily in ways that defied probability yet remained unnoticed. Each morning at 7:23 a.m., they shared the same elevator for 47 seconds, while Maximilian stared at his phone, scrolling through emails that seemed urgent but would be forgotten by noon. Isadora stood in the corner, invisible in her uniform, sometimes humming softly while he conducted business calls about mergers and acquisitions. Last Tuesday, he'd spilled coffee on his Italian leather shoes while rushing to a board meeting. Isadora had appeared within minutes, kneeling to clean the marble floor with practiced efficiency. He'd stepped around her without acknowledgement, his attention focused on quarterly projections that would determine his company's stock price. She'd watched him disappear into the executive suite, remembering a time when he'd been vulnerable enough to accept help from strangers. The security footage told the same story from a different angle. Maximilian's investigators spent hours reviewing surveillance recordings, analyzing every person who entered the building's main lobby. They focused on well-dressed visitors, potential suspects who might have information about their target. The cleaning staff remained background elements, peripheral figures whose faces were ignored in favor of more promising subjects. Camera angles captured Isadora's profile dozens of times, but the investigators' attention remained fixed on prominent arrivals, investors, executives, politicians whose presence seemed significant. They developed sophisticated algorithms to identify facial features, but their parameters excluded service workers who entered through different entrances and occupied different social categories. What neither of them realized was that destiny had been weaving their paths together for months, creating opportunities for recognition that went unnoticed because of assumptions about class, visibility, and worth. The universe had been offering chances for reunion, but sometimes the people we're looking for are hidden in plain sight by our own blind spots. Maximilian's search expanded globally while the answer worked 3 floors below his office. Isadora cleaned the offices of investigators hunting for her while humming the same melody she'd offered as comfort decades before. They occupied the same building, breathed the same air, and remained separated by barriers more powerful than physical distance. Drop a comment if you've ever missed something important that was right in front of you, because this story is about to get wild. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, jolting Maximilian from restless sleep that had become his nightly companion. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, head of his AI facial recognition team, spoke with the controlled excitement of someone who'd been working for 36 hours straight. "We found her, Mr. Hartley. 93% facial match confirmed through multiple algorithms. She's at a community center in Denver, Colorado." Within 2 hours, Maximilian was aboard his private jet, clutching a folder containing enhanced photographs and probability assessments. The flight to Denver felt eternal despite the aircraft's luxury amenities. He stared through oval windows at cloud formations that looked like question marks, each mile bringing him closer to what he prayed would be resolution. The Mile High Community Center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that urban renewal had forgotten. Maximilian's limousine looked obscenely out of place among rusted pickup trucks and economy cars held together by hope and duct tape. He walked through glass doors that bore the fingerprints of countless people seeking shelter, warmth, or simply a moment of human connection. She sat behind a folding table, ladling soup into foam containers with the same gentle efficiency his memory had preserved. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with decades of service to others, but her eyes, those eyes held the same kindness that had saved him 23 years ago. "Excuse me," Maximilian approached with trembling hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for someone who might have worked at a community center in Boston around 1999, a woman who helped people during cold weather emergencies." She looked up with patient attention, the kind reserved for people who'd clearly traveled far, seeking answers. "I'm sorry, honey. I've been here in Denver my whole life, never lived anywhere else." The words hit him like physical blows. This woman shared his angel's smile, her posture, even her way of moving through space with purposeful compassion. But she wasn't her. The voice was wrong, the accent different. The small details that memory guards so carefully simply didn't align. Standing in that shelter, looking at a woman who shared his angel's smile but not her soul, Maximilian felt more lost than ever. He'd traveled 1,200 miles chasing hope, only to discover that facial recognition software couldn't identify the ineffable qualities that make one person irreplaceable. The flight home stretched longer than the journey east. Maximilian sat in leather seats that cost more than most people's cars, surrounded by luxury that felt meaningless against the weight of another failed lead. Through his phone, he authorized payment of $2.3 million to the investigation team, money spent on sophisticated technology that had produced another expensive disappointment. Back in New York, the search room buzzed with renewed activity despite the setback. Investigators refined their algorithms, expanded search parameters, and prepared to analyze facial recognition data from additional cities. The hunt continued with mechanical precision, burning through resources at rates that would bankrupt smaller corporations. Meanwhile, 4 floors below, Isadora Reeves was about to make a discovery that would change everything. Thursday nights were always quieter in the executive suites. Most employees left by 6 p.m., leaving behind empty offices that required thorough cleaning before morning's return. Isadora worked methodically through each space, emptying wastebaskets, dusting surfaces, ensuring that tomorrow would begin with pristine conditions. Maximilian's office was scheduled for deep cleaning, floors mopped, windows polished, furniture repositioned for carpet treatment. But as she entered the expansive space, she noticed something unusual. His mahogany desk was covered with photographs, documents, and maps that hadn't been there the previous week. She'd learned to be discreet during her years of invisible service, trained to clean around personal items without disturbing their arrangement. But these materials covered the entire workspace, making thorough cleaning impossible without some reorganization. The photographs drew her attention first. Dozens of images showing women of various ages, some recent, others clearly decades old. Police sketches, driver's license photos, and surveillance captures from security cameras created a mosaic of faces that seemed connected by some invisible thread. One photograph stopped her cold. Isadora's hands trembled as she held the photo. There she was, 23 years younger, handing out blankets at the shelter, and there, barely visible in the background, was the young man she'd comforted that frozen night. The image was grainy, taken by a newspaper photographer documenting community service during a harsh winter. She remembered that evening. The camera flash had startled her while she'd been focused on helping people find warm places to sleep. The photographer had asked permission to use the image, explaining that stories about kindness during difficult times could inspire others to volunteer. She'd forgotten about the photograph entirely until this moment. Seeing her younger self preserved in black and white, captured in the act of offering comfort to strangers. But what made her breath catch was the figure in the background, a young man wrapped in the very blanket she'd provided, his face partially obscured but unmistakably familiar. The documents surrounding the photograph told a story that made her heart race. Investigation reports, financial records showing millions spent on private detectives, search patterns covering multiple states, all of it focused on finding the woman in this photograph, finding her. Her first instinct was to run, to pretend she'd never seen these materials, to continue living in the shadows where she'd remained safe for decades. But curiosity compelled her to read further, to understand the scope of what she'd accidentally uncovered. The reports revealed details that confirmed her growing suspicion. A young entrepreneur saved from despair on a winter night in 1999. A successful businessman who'd never forgotten an act of kindness. A search that had consumed 2 years and $47 million, all seeking a woman who cleaned his office every Thursday night. She sat in his leather chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of revelation. The scared young man she'd comforted had become this, a billionaire so grateful that he'd turned finding her into a personal crusade. The boy who'd shivered in her blanket now commanded resources that could reshape industries, and he was using those resources to search for someone who was closer than he could ever know. The dilemma hit her immediately. Should she reveal herself? risk the comfortable invisibility that had protected her for decades. She'd watched Maximilian from a distance, seen the toll this search was taking on him, witnessed how the obsession was consuming his peace of mind. But she'd also seen his world, a realm of private jets, expensive suits, and corporate power that seemed impossibly distant from her simple life. What would he think when he discovered that his angel was just a janitor? Would he be disappointed that his savior had become someone society deemed unremarkable? By Friday morning, Maximilian had authorized the final phase of his search. Measures so extreme they bordered on desperation. DNA analysis companies were hired to process genetic material from potential matches. Psychological profilers were brought in to create behavioral assessments. He even considered hypnotherapy to recover additional details from his memory of that night. He was spending more money to find one person than most companies made in profit, while that person earned $12.50 an hour cleaning his office. Word of the intensified search began spreading through the building's invisible workforce. Janitors, security guards, and maintenance workers noticed the increased activity on the 43rd floor, the constant stream of investigators and technical specialists. During break-room conversations, theories emerged about what kind of criminal investigation could require such resources. Maria Santos, who'd worked alongside Isadora for 12 years, was the first to make the connection. She'd glimpsed one of the photographs during her cleaning rounds and noticed the resemblance immediately. "That woman in the old photo," she whispered to Isadora during their lunch break. "She looks just like you did when you first started working here." Isadora's heart stopped, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. Lots of people look similar, especially in old photographs where the quality isn't clear. But Maria's observation planted seeds of speculation that grew during whispered conversations in service elevators and supply closets. The invisible workforce began paying closer attention to the search materials, creating their own theories about why their company's CEO had become so consumed with finding one particular woman. As the investigation consumed more of Maximilian's attention, Isadora watched his transformation with growing concern. He arrived earlier each morning, left later each evening, and seemed to age months within weeks. The vibrant executive who'd once commanded boardrooms with confidence now appeared haunted by questions that had no answers. She began leaving small signs, positioning his pens differently, placing inspirational quotes in places he'd find them, arranging flowers in his office vase with careful attention to color and meaning. These tiny gestures of care felt like messages in bottles, cast across the ocean of class difference that separated their worlds. Maximilian noticed these changes but attributed them to his regular cleaning staff's attention to detail. He had no idea that the person responsible for these small kindnesses was the same woman who'd taught him that compassion could survive in the coldest circumstances. The tension in the building grew palpable as the search reached fever pitch. Maximilian considered hiring a famous psychic, explored purchasing surveillance data from additional cities, and discussed with his board the possibility of offering a public reward that would make international headlines. Isadora knew the moment of decision was approaching. She could continue hiding in plain sight, watching him destroy himself with obsession, or she could find the courage to step into the light and face whatever consequences awaited. If you were Isadora, would you reveal yourself or stay hidden? Let me know in the comments and smash that subscribe button because this story is about to reach its incredible climax. Thursday night arrived with the weight of accumulated disappointment. Maximilian sat slumped in his leather chair, surrounded by the debris of another failed investigation. The latest report lay scattered across his desk. 300 pages documenting how a promising lead in Philadelphia had crumbled under scrutiny, leaving behind only another expensive dead end and deeper despair. The numbers haunted him. $47.3 million spent, 1,847 false leads investigated, 23 months of relentless searching. His reflection in the darkened window showed a man who'd aged years in the span of seasons, his success hollow against the backdrop of personal failure. Every corporate victory felt meaningless when measured against this one persistent defeat. His phone buzzed with messages from concerned board members who'd watched their CEO transform from confident leader to obsessive searcher. Stock analysts questioned his judgment publicly. Business magazines ran features about his mysterious midlife crisis that was costing shareholders millions in diverted resources. But Maximilian couldn't stop, not when every fiber of his being insisted that she was still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. The memory of her kindness had sustained him through decades of challenges. It was the foundation upon which his entire empire rested. Finding her wasn't optional. It was essential to his very identity. 4 floors below, Isadora Reeves pushed her cleaning cart through familiar corridors with unusual purpose. Tonight felt different from the thousands of nights that had preceded it. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights staring at the silver locket, remembering her grandmother's words. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen. Her grandmother had been a woman of quiet wisdom, someone who'd raised Isadora after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. The locket had been her grandmother's most treasured possession, a gift from her husband before he'd shipped out to World War II, never to return. She'd worn it every day until her death, and it had passed to Isadora as both inheritance and responsibility. "Wear it when you need courage," her grandmother had whispered on her deathbed. "Let it remind you that love persists even when circumstances change." For 3 days, Isadora had wrestled with impossible choices: reveal herself and risk shattering the comfortable invisibility that had protected her for decades, or continue watching a good man destroy himself, searching for someone who cleaned his office every Thursday night. She'd observed Maximilian's deterioration with growing concern. His vibrant confidence had eroded into desperate obsession. He looked thin, exhausted, consumed by a quest that was slowly killing the very spirit she'd once tried to preserve. The scared young man she'd comforted had found success beyond measure, but he was losing himself in the process of trying to repay an old debt. Tonight, she'd made her decision. The executive floor was nearly empty as Isadora approached Maximilian's office. Through the glass walls, she could see him sitting motionless, staring at documents that represented another expensive failure. His shoulders sagged with the weight of accumulated disappointment, and her heart ached for the pain he was inflicting upon himself. Instead of beginning her usual cleaning routine, she stood in the doorway, gathering courage that had taken 6 decades to fully develop. Her grandmother's locket pressed against her chest beneath the gray uniform, a tangible reminder that some moments require extraordinary bravery. "Mr. Hartley?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the office silence like a bell. Maximilian looked up with the startled expression of someone unaccustomed to being addressed by members of the invisible workforce. In 18 years of working in this building, no janitor had ever spoken to him directly unless responding to a specific request or emergency. "Yes?" His response was automatic, polite but distant, the tone reserved for service interactions that were brief and functional. Isadora stepped into the office, her hands trembling slightly as she reached beneath her uniform collar. The silver chain caught the overhead lighting as she lifted the locket free, letting it rest against the gray fabric where it could catch the light properly. "You were so cold that night. I wasn't sure the blanket would be enough." The words hung in the air between them like suspended magic. Maximilian's eyes fixed on the locket with laser intensity, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. The rose etching was exactly as he remembered. Delicate petals arranged in perfect symmetry, each line worn smooth by decades of wear. Maximilian's multi-million-dollar education, his razor-sharp business instincts, his ability to read market trends, none of it prepared him for this moment. Time seemed to fracture and rebuild itself around the sight of that rose-etched locket. He rose from his chair with movements that felt dreamlike, his legs unsteady beneath him. The locket swayed gently as Isadora breathed, catching light that transformed it into captured starlight. Every detail matched his memory with supernatural precision. The size, the color, the way it moved with quiet grace. "It's you." The words escaped as breath rather than sound. "You're the woman you've been looking for." Her voice carried the same gentle strength he remembered from that frozen night 23 years ago. "I know because I've been watching you search for me." The revelation hit him with physical force. He gripped the edge of his desk for support, his mind reeling through the implications. I spent 2 years, $50 million. You've been here all along? Isadora nodded, her expression mixing sadness with infinite compassion. I recognized you the day I started working here, 18 years ago. You looked different, successful, confident, but I remembered your eyes. They were the same eyes that looked up at me from those community center steps. But why didn't you? Maximilian's voice broke as the full weight of the situation crashed over him. Why didn't you say anything? What would I have said? Isadora's smile held decades of quiet acceptance. That your cleaning lady was the person who gave you a blanket once? You were building an empire, Mr. Hartley. I was just someone who emptied your wastebaskets. They began piecing together that night, detail by detail, like archaeologists reconstructing ancient history. She described the bitter wind that had cut through her coat as she'd walked home from her volunteer shift. He remembered the specific brand of tea she'd given him, chamomile with honey, still his favorite drink during stressful times. The threadbare quilt, Maximilian said, his voice growing stronger as memories solidified. It smelled like lavender. My grandmother's fabric softener, Isadora confirmed. I kept that blanket for years after she passed. Used it whenever I needed to feel connected to her kindness. You told me that whatever I was running from wasn't stronger than what I was running toward. You needed to hear that someone believed in your future, even when you couldn't see it yourself. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, each shared detail adding another piece to a puzzle that had consumed Maximilian's life for 24 months. But as understanding dawned, so did crushing realization of his blindness. I never expected you to remember, Isadora said gently. I just saw someone who needed help. The emotional weight became unbearable. Maximilian felt his carefully constructed composure crumble as decades of guilt and gratitude crashed together. Tears he hadn't shed since childhood began flowing freely, carrying away years of accumulated pressure. How many times did I walk past you? How many times did I ignore the person who saved my life? He collapsed back into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his oversight. Every morning in the elevator, every brief encounter in the hallway, every moment when he'd looked through her instead of at her, all of it felt like betrayal of the most profound kind. I've been such a fool, he whispered. You've been right here, and I never saw you. Isadora moved closer, her presence bringing the same comfort it had decades ago. You weren't ignoring me, Mr. Hartley. You were busy becoming the man that scared boy always had the potential to be. Her forgiveness felt like absolution he didn't deserve but desperately needed. She'd watched him succeed, had taken pride in his achievements from the shadows, never expecting recognition or gratitude for her role in his transformation. I built all of this. Maximilian gestured toward his empire visible through the windows, because of what you gave me that night. Not just the blanket or the tea, but the belief that I was worth saving. And look what you've accomplished, Isadora replied. You've created thousands of jobs, revolutionized entire industries, made the world more secure through your innovations. That scared young man became everything I hoped he could be. The moment crystallized into perfect clarity. Maximilian's search hadn't been about finding her. It had been about understanding himself, about acknowledging the foundation of human kindness upon which his success rested. She'd been present all along, not as a memory to be recovered, but as a living reminder that greatness grows from compassion. He reached for his phone with hands that still trembled from revelation and emotional release. His fingers moved across the screen with newfound purpose as he composed a message to his executive assistant. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, he announced, his voice carrying newfound strength. Full board, all department heads, every senior executive. What will you tell them? Isadora asked. Maximilian looked at her with eyes that finally saw clearly. I'm going to change everything, starting with how we see each other. The transformation had begun, not with the completion of his search, but with the recognition that what he'd been seeking had been blessing his life continuously, hidden only by his own inability to perceive value in unexpected places. The boardroom at 8 a.m. Friday morning buzzed with confusion and speculation. Maximilian had summoned every senior executive, department head, and board member for an emergency meeting, providing no agenda beyond company transformation initiative. Rumors circulated through the corporate corridors. Was Soulless Innovations being sold? Had a competitor launched a hostile takeover? Was their CEO finally having the breakdown that Wall Street analysts had been predicting? Maximilian entered with Isadora beside him, her gray uniform replaced by a simple but elegant navy dress he'd purchased that morning from the department store across the street. She moved with quiet dignity, though her hands trembled slightly at being surrounded by people who'd never seen her as more than part of the building's invisible infrastructure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maximilian began, his voice carrying newfound clarity, "I want you to meet the person who made this company possible." The silence that followed was deafening. 23 executives stared at a woman they'd passed countless times without acknowledgement, trying to understand why their billionaire CEO would make such an extraordinary claim about someone they perceived as hired help. Maximilian told the story without embellishment: the frozen night, the kindness of a stranger, the 2-year search that had consumed millions while the answer cleaned their offices. As he spoke, he watched expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to gradually dawning recognition of the profound irony. "This woman," he continued, gesturing toward Isadora, "taught me that success means nothing if it doesn't lift others up. I built this company on that principle, but somewhere along the way, I forgot to live it." Board member Patricia Williams, a 70-year-old veteran of corporate warfare, shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair. "Maximilian, this is a touching personal story, but I'm not sure why it requires emergency board action." "Because we're about to change everything," Maximilian replied with steel in his voice. "Starting immediately, every support staff member in this company will see their salary doubled. Security guards, custodians, maintenance workers, food service staff, everyone who keeps this place running while remaining invisible to those of us in suits." Chief Financial Officer Robert Chen nearly choked on his coffee. "That's a $43 million annual commitment. Our shareholders will revolt." "Our shareholders will adapt," Maximilian responded calmly. "We're also implementing monthly recognition ceremonies for what I'm calling our invisible heroes, the people who arrive before dawn and leave after midnight, who ensure our offices are clean, our buildings secure, our technology functioning." The resistance was immediate and predictable. Several board members exchanged glances that conveyed shared concern about their CEO's judgment. Chief Operating Officer Sarah Mitchell raised her hand like a student seeking permission to speak. "These are admirable sentiments," she said carefully, "but they represent fundamental changes to our operational structure. Perhaps we should form a committee to study." "No committees," Maximilian interrupted. "No studies, no delays. We're also launching full educational benefits for every employee and their families. Anyone who works for Soulless Innovations can pursue college degrees, technical training, or professional certifications at company expense." The room erupted in whispered conversations as executives calculated costs and considered implications. Maximilian waited for the noise to subside before delivering his final announcement. "Additionally, we're establishing the Isadora Reeves Scholarship, a $50 million endowment providing full college tuition for children of service workers nationwide. Not just our employees, but custodians, security guards, and maintenance staff at every major corporation." The transformation extended beyond corporate policy into personal behavior. That afternoon, Maximilian walked into the employee cafeteria, a space he'd never entered despite working in the building for 15 years. He purchased a turkey sandwich and apple juice, then sat at a table with surprised maintenance workers who struggled to understand why their billionaire CEO was eating lunch among them. Over the following weeks, he learned the names of every custodian, security guard, and maintenance worker in the building. Maria Santos, who'd worked alongside Isadora for 12 years and was pursuing her nursing degree through night school. James Rodriguez, the security supervisor whose daughter had just been accepted to Princeton but couldn't afford tuition. Margaret Foster, the 62-year-old cleaner who sent half her paycheck to support grandchildren in rural Alabama. Each morning, Maximilian made a point of personally thanking Isadora for her work. Not patronizing gestures, but genuine recognition of someone whose contribution had shaped his life in ways that financial statements could never capture. Their conversations became daily rituals that grounded him in humility and reminded him of the human foundation beneath corporate success. The media attention was swift and intense. The Wall Street Journal broke the story with the headline, "Billionaire's $50 million search ends in his own building," followed by detailed coverage in Forbes, Businessweek, and CNN. Every major business publication wanted interviews with both Maximilian and the woman whose kindness had inspired such dramatic corporate transformation. Isadora handled the attention with characteristic grace, declining most interview requests, but agreeing to a thoughtful conversation with 60 Minutes. Her most quoted response became a rallying cry for workplace dignity. "Every person you meet is carrying something heavy. The least we can do is help them carry it." The story resonated far beyond business circles. Within weeks, other companies began implementing similar recognition programs. Microsoft announced a living wage initiative for all contract workers. Amazon created scholarship funds for children of warehouse employees. Google established monthly celebrations honoring facilities and security staff. Harvard Business School quickly developed a case study titled "The Hidden Workforce: Leadership Through Recognition," which became required reading in executive management programs. The concept spread internationally as corporations in 12 countries adopted variations of the Faceless model. Social media amplified the message through the hashtag #SeeTheInvisible, encouraging people to acknowledge service workers who kept their worlds functioning. Videos flooded platforms showing office workers thanking custodians, restaurant patrons recognizing bus staff, and students appreciating school maintenance crews. The most surprising development was Isadora's response to her newfound visibility. Publishers offered book deals worth millions. Speaking bureaus proposed lecture tours that could earn more in 1 year than she'd made in 2 decades of cleaning. Executive recruiters called with opportunities to lead corporate social responsibility initiatives at Fortune 500 companies. She declined them all. "I appreciate these generous offers," she told Maximilian during one of their morning conversations. "But this is where I belong. This is where I can make the most difference." Instead, she accepted a new position as head of facilities and human dignity, leading a team responsible for ensuring every support staff member felt valued and respected. Her office was located on the executive floor, but she spent most of her time in break rooms, supply closets, and service areas where the invisible workforce gathered. The transformation created ripple effects that extended far beyond soulless innovations. Industry publications tracked the Isadora effect as companies scrambled to avoid being labeled as organizations that failed to value their entire workforce. Stock prices initially fluctuated as investors questioned the financial wisdom of doubling support staff salaries, but ultimately stabilized as productivity increased and employee turnover plummeted. Most importantly, the changes restored Maximilian's sense of purpose. His success finally felt complete. Not because he'd found the woman he'd been seeking, but because he'd rediscovered the values that had originally motivated his journey from desperate young entrepreneur to industry leader. This transformation happened because one person had the courage to be vulnerable. Share this story if you believe every workplace should recognize the people who make it run. And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss how this story ends. 5 years later, the bronze plaque mounted in the main lobby of Faceless Innovations gleamed under carefully positioned lighting that ensured every visitor would notice its inscription. "In honor of Isadora Reeves and all who labor in love." The words had been chosen carefully, crafted to honor not just one woman's kindness, but the countless acts of service that kept the world functioning while remaining largely unnoticed. The transformation had exceeded every prediction. Faceless Innovations now held the top ranking globally for employee satisfaction, a distinction that attracted the best talent from around the world. More remarkably, the company had achieved zero turnover among support staff, an unprecedented accomplishment in an industry known for treating service workers as replaceable components. The executive floor break room had become an unexpected sanctuary where the most important conversations in the building took place. Every third Tuesday of the month, Maximilian and Isadora maintained their coffee tradition, sitting at the same corner table that had witnessed their monthly discussions for half a decade. Today, Isadora arrived with a worn leather journal, its pages filled with 5 years of observations about human nature, corporate transformation, and the delicate art of seeing dignity in unexpected places. Her poetry had evolved from hidden reflections into published works that appeared in leadership magazines and business school curricula. "I wrote something about Marcus yesterday," she said, referring to the young security guard who'd recently completed his engineering degree through the company's education program. "He told me that 5 years ago, executives would walk past him like he was furniture. Now they stop to ask about his classes, his family, his dreams for the future." Maximilian sipped his coffee, the same chamomile with honey blend she'd given him on that frozen night 23 years ago, and smiled at the familiar routine. "Your poetry has been documenting our transformation better than any consultant could. The Harvard case study team wants to include your verses in their final report." Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated. The grateful CEO and humble janitor had become trusted friends, whose conversations shaped major corporate decisions. When Maximilian faced difficult choices about market expansion or strategic partnerships, he often sought Isadora's perspective, knowing her insights into human motivation exceeded anything taught in business schools. "There's something beautiful happening on the 12th floor," Isadora continued, reading from her journal. "Sarah Chen in accounting has been tutoring the night cleaning crew in English. 3 of them are now enrolled in community college, and 1 is planning to apply for the engineering program next year." These stories had become commonplace throughout the building, spontaneous acts of mentorship and support that transformed a corporate hierarchy into a genuine community. The culture change had produced measurable results that shocked industry analysts and academic researchers. The financial implications were staggering in ways nobody had anticipated. The search for Isadora had cost exactly $50 million over 2 years, representing the most expensive personnel hunt in corporate history. But the cultural transformation triggered by her revelation had increased productivity by $200 million annually through reduced turnover, improved morale, and enhanced innovation from employees who felt genuinely valued. "I thought I was searching for someone who saved me once," Maximilian reflected, stirring honey into his tea. "Turns out, she's been saving me every day for 20 years. The Isadora Reeves Scholarship had grown beyond anyone's wildest projections. What began as a $50 million endowment now funded over 1,000 students annually, creating a pipeline of opportunity for children whose parents worked in service industries across the nation. The program had inspired similar initiatives at dozens of major corporations, creating a movement that was reshaping access to higher education. Success stories arrived monthly. Children of janitors becoming doctors, security guards' daughters earning engineering degrees, custodians' sons pursuing careers in technology and finance. Each scholarship recipient received not just tuition support, but mentorship from Faceless employees who understood the unique challenges of being first-generation college students. Yet Isadora's daily routine remained largely unchanged. She still arrived at 4 a.m., still hummed the same lullaby while working, still moved through the building with the quiet efficiency that had characterized her service for over 2 decades. The difference was that now her work was recognized, celebrated, and understood as essential to the company's success. Her office on the executive floor served primarily as a symbol, proof that service work deserved the same respect as any other contribution to corporate achievement. But she spent most of her time where she'd always belonged, among the people who kept the building functioning while the business world slept. The transformation had attracted global attention beyond corporate circles. Maximilian's TED Talk, viewed over 12 million times, contained a quote that became emblematic of the movement toward workplace dignity. "We live in glass towers, but sometimes we're too tall to see the foundation that holds us up." His message resonated across industries and cultures. In every workplace, every community, every family, there are invisible heroes whose quiet acts of service make everything else possible. Our success depends not just on those who lead, but on those who serve, who clean, who secure, who maintain, who care for the details that allow excellence to flourish. The most profound moment came on a cold Tuesday night in March, during one of Maximilian's late evening visits to the office. Walking past the intern cubicles, he discovered a young woman asleep at her desk, surrounded by legal briefs and empty coffee cups. Her nameplate read, Jennifer Martinez, legal intern, and her exhausted posture reminded him powerfully of his own desperate nights decades earlier. As he approached to offer assistance, Isadora appeared with a soft blanket and a thermos of hot coffee, moving with the same purposeful kindness she'd shown on those community center steps. "Another young person who needs to know they're not alone," she said softly, draping the blanket around Jennifer's shoulders without waking her. This time, Maximilian joined her. Together, they left an encouraging note expressing belief in Jennifer's potential, along with information about the company's educational support programs and mental health resources. The next morning, they would personally ensure she knew about the mentorship opportunities available to help her navigate the challenges of building a career while managing financial stress. The moment represented perfect closure. The scared young entrepreneur had become the established leader, ready to offer the same support he'd once received. The cycle of kindness continued, perpetuated by people who understood that success means lifting others as you climb. 5 years had proven that finding Isadora was never really about locating one person. It had been about rediscovering the fundamental truth that human dignity doesn't depend on job titles or salary levels, that greatness often wears uniforms instead of suits, and that the most important work in any organization is often performed by those whose contributions remain invisible until someone takes the time to truly see. If this story moved you, if it changed how you see the people around you, please share it, because somewhere out there is another Maximilian who needs to find his Isadora, and another Isadora waiting to be seen. Subscribe for more stories that prove every human being has the power to change a life. And remember, the next time you see someone working quietly in the background, that might be someone's guardian angel in disguise.